It is both tempting and convenient to view the photonic space through an applications-focused lens. In some cases, this field is most easily expressed by its applications, even more so than by its technologies. But there is a strong case to make that it is neither applications nor technologies that distinguish our field. It may well be that it is the individuals and the personalities that shine brightest. It is from the people in the industry, after all, that knowledge endures, and the stories that emerge along the way are often more than insightful. Frequently, they are remarkably entertaining. In today's All Things Photonics Spotlight conversation, Opticos Corporation CEO and founder Stephen Fantone discusses the profound influence of professional organizations, societies, and foundations. Our conversation reveals not only their value, but also how one's professional life relates to one's career life. Fantone shares insights into how effort, relationship fostering, and even serendipity can help chart a course to opportunities as rewarding as they are unexpected. The conversation is entertaining, but it is also inspiring. Remarkable stories so often begin in the most unremarkable ways. It is how we identify opportunity and how we pursue it that distinguishes the people who distinguish our industry.
Today's episode is brought to you by Hamamatsu Corporation, a leading manufacturer of devices for the generation and measurement of infrared, visible, UV light, and X-rays. Hamamatsu is dedicated to the advancement of photonics through extensive research and offers specialized systems for select applications. Visit hamamatsu.com to learn more.
This is Spotlight from All Things Photonics, featuring intimate sit-down conversations with preeminent figures in optics and photonics. Unscripted, timely, and topical, this series shines the spotlight on industry-leading changemakers, covering all corners of the photonics landscape, from the gateways of progress to the most impactful challenges of our time.
So one of the things that I think has become apparent, and this is kind of an interesting thing to unpack here, is that there is a very distinct difference between one's career life and one's professional life. They sound similar, but there's a bit more nuance, I think, than just sort of the semantic thing. And so right off the top, Steve, I'm hoping that you can define those two things for us and break them down.
Well, when one thinks about a person's career, you sort of think about their job. What are they doing on a day-to-day basis? And if you're an engineer, you might be a mechanical designer, a tooling engineer, a lens designer, optical coating designer. But the bigger picture is the full career and that trajectory and the ancillary people that you interact with and the community that you're working within. And so it's the broader context in which you actually do your job that occupies you day to day.
And there is also, of course, a one's personal life, right? One's own life outside of the workplace, outside of their professional endeavors. That is part of this equation that I think we're going to discuss today. One of the other things that I think is going to be central to our conversation is this notion of professional organizations, maybe societies. We have to get the words right, and we will, I think, as we get going. But under that umbrella, the Hertz Foundation is one that I know has been highly relevant and impactful to you. And you've said that your receipt of a Hertz fellowship came at a time in your life when it was really something that could make a difference. The other piece of that is that you had to take it and make a difference with it. And I wanted to talk to you about that. What's your advice to professionals about maximizing opportunities when they emerge?
Well, the first thing is to recognize that you have many opportunities. I stumbled into a Hertz fellowship in that I was completely unaware that there was such a thing. And a professor came to me and almost incidentally said, "Well, by the way, there's this fellowship opportunity. You should apply for it." And it would have been very easy for me to go home that night and just say, I don't need another thing to do. And I applied for it, not knowing much about it, went through the interview process, which is a challenging interview process. And then, much to my surprise, I was lucky enough to win uh, that fellowship. And that really gave me a boost of confidence, basically a vote, a great attaboy that uh, told me that I was on the right path and gave me encouragement at a point in my life where, small changes in your trajectory can make a big difference in how that career trajectory really flies.
I want to talk about kind of the range of professional opportunities that you've been able to capitalize upon and pursue, because objectively they're somewhat outside the range, outside the bounds of what one might expect of someone in the optics and photonics realm. What's been the key for you, not only to arrive on the doorstep of different opportunities, but to be able to then walk through the door?
I think there's really two aspects of that. One is a natural curiosity to learn new things, meet new people, get exposed to new ideas. And in doing so, you end up with interactions in which opportunities are presented to you, but you still have to say yes. And my interactions with the Optical Society started at a very early age. When my first day of graduate school, my advisor, who was president of the local Optical Society section, asked me, "Would you be my house chairman this year?" And I had no idea what a house chairman was or did, but I figured, well, he wouldn't be asking me unless it would be, somewhat interesting. So I said yes. And as it turned out, that job, and it was work. I had to arrange for the local meeting place, and I had to arrange that there be a dinner for the speaker, and I had to arrange the refreshments and the audio visuals, and I did that for 2 years. And what it allowed me to do was, first of all, meet all of the speakers, meet the governance of the local optical society section, develop relationships and a network with them, many of whom would invite me to their companies for tours. This was something my classmates really didn't get to experience. And I also got to eat dinner with the speaker. And as a graduate student, I was a threat to nobody. Everyone was very nice to me and open with me and willing to give advice and share their viewpoints. And I found that to be very enriching.
At what point, and let's go back to that time. At what point, let me rephrase, when you're in the moment here, you're a year in, you're 2 years in, this opportunity has become part of your life. It's kind of within the structure of your life. It's established itself as a real opportunity to have a seat literally at the table. Does it still feel like work, or in that moment, are you realizing the doors are opening?
Uh, I think you realize that uh, you're in a very serendipitous world and you don't know what it's going to lead to next. But as you're sitting there with a Nobel Prize winner, a person that has, won awards in the Optical Society or has this incredible reputation for science and discovery, you begin to see a little bit about how they think and how they approach problems. And that, I think, natural curiosity that I have about what is it that makes people successful? How are they able to achieve such things? I find to be actually fun. For me, yes, there was a work aspect to it, but I ended up with something to show for it, and that is increased knowledge.
We're talking about your journey and the different facets that compose your journey. You've been at some very well-known, reputable uh, institutions. You talked about University of Rochester, MIT, um, board member. You've had a number of opportunities and you've worked at them, and there may be some serendipity involved. But this has been a journey for you. I want to ask, at what point does one's professional life begin to intertwine with their career endeavors, and what does that kind of mashup look like?
Well, it's interesting that you ask that because for me, as a teenager, was very interested in astronomy and building telescopes, and I had no idea that you could actually make a career and a living from that. never mind have a professional experience. But what I came to find out is that uh, you can, and so my life it's intertwined with uh, my professional life and my personal life. I went to the University of Rochester for graduate school. I ended up meeting a person, Jay Eastman, that was 5 or 6 years older than I was. He introduced me to his wife's sister. So, in many ways, when you're immersed in these communities, you end up becoming entangled. And uh, for me, that's been a great experience. I spend a lot of time on my professional activities, networking, being in the local optical society or Optica sections. And over time, that's where you form your friendships. That's where you form very long-standing relationships that you carry throughout your entire career.
I alluded to the fact earlier that not every professional organization necessarily qualifies as a society. That might be a term that is somewhat unique within the optics and photonics realm. Want to talk to you about your time at Optica, what that meant to you, and how that was able to help you grow yourself as an optics and photonics professional.
Well, I mentioned earlier about my work when I was in graduate school, supporting the local section. Later on, I was invited to be the program chair of an optical fabrication and testing workshop, and that led to service on a committee. And all the time that you're doing this, you're meeting people in the field and really developing a better understanding of how the field works. And I rose through the governance of the organization until I served on the board because I was chair of the engineering council. And then in 1996, a vacancy emerged for the treasurer of the Optical Society. And they came to me and asked me if I would fill out previous treasurer's term. That was John Bjorkholm. And he had done a fantastic job. And I said, yes, I would do that. Well, one thing led to another. I held that job for 18 and a half years. And I view it as the best volunteer job that you could possibly have in the profession. In that, as treasurer, you really learn how the society worked, not just financially, but also as an operation, a publishing operation, a meetings operation. It's a business that has some scale to it of nearly 150 employees. And you end up interacting over that period of time on virtually every aspect of the organization. While doing that, you're meeting a wide variety of people. Your job as treasurer is in part to ensure the success of the then serving president and board. And so you get to know all of the presidents, you get to know the committee chairs, you get to know the publishers and the journal editors. And so it really is a unique view into the entire technology and application area. Later on, I went on to serve as later on I went on to serve as president. That was the year of COVID, and normally you spend that year as president traveling the world and opening meetings and giving people awards. For me, it was a very different kind of challenge because the business was, like every business was that year, really flipped over, and we needed to make some hard decisions about the community that we served. I found that really engaging. Uh, did I miss the travel? Sure, but it provided me an opportunity to really look at a new set of challenges, and I find that particularly exciting.
I think maybe raw serendipity is one thing. Networking certainly is one thing. But part of your story, I think a big part of your story, have been the connections you've been able to make and foster, kind of in unpredictable, out of the blue ways. So while you're part of the optical society and you're advancing yourself and the field that way, there are other things that are happening maybe in parallel that don't necessarily follow that same track. Can you just talk a little bit about um, how kind of chance has played a part in this for you?
Uh,
There's one story in particular I'm hoping you'll tell, and it does involve travel,
okay.
perhaps waiting at an airport. And I'm
Yes,
trying to find the right way into.
this was March 31st, 1986.
Yeah, I remembers the day exactly.
Well, the day is easy to remember because this person pulled an April Fool's joke on me that the next day. And I was waiting in line with my wife, Betsy, at Logan Airport at 4 a.m. in the morning, awaiting a charter flight to Bonaire to go scuba diving. And most of the people in that line were somber, quiet, all wondering to themselves, why did they ever agree to take a 5 a.m. charter flight, um, out of Logan Airport, which probably necessitated you to get up at 2:30 in the morning. I noticed ahead of me in line that there was a gentleman about 25 years older than I am, and he had a bit of energy. And he was looking around and he was observing the world and seemed to be fully engaged. And he drew my attention, and I noticed on his hand he wore an MIT class ring, which we affectionately refer to as a brass rat because it has a beaver on the front of it. And so I went up to him and I asked him what course he was at MIT. You don't major in physics, you're course 8. If you're a mechanical engineer, you're course 2. And he responded he was course 2. And I asked him what year he was, and he said 1950. And we ended up having a full conversation, found out that we were both going to the same resort. We ended up having several meals together, scuba diving together, and we initiated a long-term friendship starting at that point. He was the founder of a company called Benthos, which is an oceanographic instrumentation company on Cape Cod. And a few years after that, we had obviously done some things socially together, and he had come in and provided some advisory services to my company. He asked me to join his board. Gee, yeah, I found that very interesting. I was curious about oceanographic instrumentation and went on the board. And 2 years later, I went into a board meeting, and he announced to the board that he didn't want to be chairman anymore. And they asked him, well, who do you think should be chairman? And he looked at me and he said, I think Steve should. Well, that was a total surprise to me. And I assumed that role. 10 years later, we grew the company over a period of 10 years, had a number of secondary stock offerings, and ultimately sold the company to Teledyne Technologies as an exit, which was a great outcome. And I look at that and I think, well, how did that opportunity get presented to me? Well, I could have very easily been a very quiet person standing in line and have never met Sam Raymond. But I took the initiative. I saw a person that I found interesting. I struck up a conversation with him, and we ended up with a mutually beneficial relationship with great friendship throughout his life. And I learned a lot serving in the role on that board and as chair. And, there's no way to have ever predicted that opportunity or that outcome. So it was really a tremendous experience for me, very rewarding. And I do find that some of the most rewarding experiences in your life relate to things that you do with other people. And Sam Raymond was a real pioneer in the oceanographic instrumentation area.
What I don't want to be lost here is that you are a business owner, business founder, right? In addition to all of the pursuits and the undertakings we're talking about that require work, effort, stick-to-itiveness, you're also a business owner. I want to talk about another intersection, like these skills, the ability to capitalize on some of these opportunities. Again, there is some serendipity, sure, but there's a skill set involved in being able to leverage these opportunities when they present themselves. Is that something that you find you want to instill in your employees, coworkers, colleagues?
Well, I think it's all related to curiosity. And while it's easy for engineers to imagine curiosity as being how does something work, or what are the fundamental physical principles that explain a phenomenon. But it also relates to people. And when I look at successful people, and I've had the opportunity to work with a really wonderful group of people, you learn something by working with them. What is it? Well, how do they have those insights, those inventive moments? What is it in their experience that they use to be creative themselves and to do novel things? And I've just always been attracted to that and have learned a lot from it, because most people are very willing to share.
I think one of the nice things about curiosity, and again, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, is that it's interdisciplinary. It spans one's professional pursuits, one's personal pursuits, and it's not restricted to one field. You've chaired the board of a public policy institute in Boston, right? That's a highly cerebral thing to do. Are there ever moments where you're not just curious, but maybe intimidated, or you're reflecting on the fact that you're around some really brilliant people and maybe it's time to learn?
Well, it's always time to learn. And I think that in the case which you're talking about there is the Pioneer Institute,
Mhm.
a public policy institute in Boston. One would look at my background and say, how did that happen? And again, it's a number of serendipitous events. I was invited to an annual dinner by a friend of mine that was serving on their board, and he said, "You might like this program." And they had a speaker that night that was particularly engaging, and I wanted to learn more about the organization and its ability to impact public policy in Massachusetts. I'm a big fan of Massachusetts. I went to college here. I built a business here. My children were educated here. It's a jewel in the crown, so to speak, of intellectually uh, in the area, and I just feel very strongly about it. And if I could help it get even better, then why not? And so I went on that board. And I started by chairing the Research and Programs Committee, which was sort of a moribund committee at that time. And I thought that would be the most intellectually interesting committee. And what it gave me the opportunity to do was look at the programs, research programs that they had regarding public policy, uh, get influence as far as which direction they should go in, and hear from the researchers themselves. And oftentimes these are early career individuals in the public policy area. They have a lot of energy. You'll learn a lot um, about areas that I had no real background in. However, in the not-for-profit world, they appreciate and they can use the insights of people that have built businesses and know how to organize activities and get things done. And I think my service there, I was chair for 8 years. Uh, we grew the organization significantly, increased its reach in the public policy area, and it continues to this day to be a major voice in public policy in Massachusetts.
You have some experience in policy, certainly in physics and engineering. Law is another area that you have at least dipped your toe into. As an aside, I recommend anyone listening to look at the background of Stephen Fantone. It is an interesting read, and it segues into a great conversation. But law is an area that is another one of those you wouldn't expect it, and yet the opportunity presented itself to you. Is there a transferability? You embark on a pursuit in law, you embark on a pursuit in policy. Certainly, you have your physics and engineering. Are there ways in which working in those three areas or any other area can help with the others?
I think structured thought is what it really comes down to. Um, my exposure into the legal field really came through intellectual property. And when I was employed at Polaroid, they took, inappropriately so, intellectual property and patent protection very, very seriously. And so I, from the get-go, started to generate a fair amount of intellectual property that became manifest in patents, issued patents. And over the years, I think my patent count is somewhere over 70. But what I also learned was how patents get drafted, how patents get prosecuted, how patents get litigated. And I served in a number of high-profile patent infringement cases as an expert. Luckily, they did not impact my company or me personally. But in doing so, I sort of got the inside baseball view of what it is really like to litigate patents, what are the important features of patents. I developed a new appreciation for the precision of the English language and the importance of precision in writing patent claims and specifications. And all in all, it was just a very interesting experience. And again, it exposed me to a wide range of practitioners in the field, and furthered my education. At any given time, you'd say to yourself, is this going to help me 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? What I just felt confident about was that everything I learned was cumulative. And I have a pretty good memory, so I tend to be able to remember things and appreciate how I would apply them in the future. And so I have always built this as all these experiences helping build a toolkit.
All of the experiences are also, there's an aspect of work, right? If you're going to take them seriously and maximize them, you have to apply yourself to them. You mentioned the notion of looking back on, is this going to help me in 5, 10, 15 years? Do you feel now that you've had a pretty good return on your investments?
That's an interesting thought of what is the return on investment. I've always viewed things as I wanted to succeed in 3 aspects of my life. I wanted to succeed as a person, being fair and honest with people, and have a family that I could be proud of and be a part of. And I think I've been lucky enough. I've got a wonderful wife. I have 2 grown children. Both of them work in the business with me. They're both smart kids. If they had other things they wanted to do, they could go out. They don't need a job at Opticos to be professionally fulfilled. But although it was never the plan, here they are, and I'm very lucky in being able to work with my children. I also wanted to have a successful technical career, and I think that I can look back and say there's a lot there to be proud of. But also, I wanted to really be a part of a broader community. And when I was a child, I was building telescopes, as I mentioned earlier, and I had a book called Amateur Telescope Making. And I remember as a 14-year-old reading that book. And there's a chapter written by James Baker. And James Baker is a luminary in the field of optics. And I could do a whole hour on just Jim. And I had wanted to work with him when I came out of school. And I wrote him a note. And when I was in graduate school, asking if he would take on an apprentice. And he said, oh, no, I don't do that. I am under a personal service contract with Polaroid Corporation. And so he wished me well. Well, when I finished my graduate studies, I ended up at Polaroid. And the first task that I was given was to do work for Jim Baker. And again, was that serendipitous? Serendipity? I don't know. It was a good fortune for me. And I was able to meet a person and work very closely with a person, and then have a lifelong friendship with a person that I greatly admired as a teenager. And my life has been a series of those kinds of experiences. And, there's an old saying, you are the average of your 5 closest friends. And when I look at the people that I'm able to know and work with and count on. I've been very lucky to have those many more than 5 closest friends that are people that I admire and have, you know, been lucky enough that they shared part of their lives with me.
Stephen Fantone, our guest on All Things Photonics. I want to end with this. We haven't discussed it, but it's quite clear that there's a need to adapt and evolve as one moves through all facets of their life. What advice do you have on not just recognizing that need, but also putting sort of words into action and being able to adapt to technology, to societal trends, to anything that you might need to adapt to in order to sustain success?
I think it's that you really have to embrace it and know that if you do, it will lead to other things. When I first came out of school and went to work, we had typists, we had call directors. And when they first came in and said, we're going to no longer have the call directors, you're going to have a message machine that your phone plugs into, people said, oh man, I want my secretary back, or I want. That was one of the best things that ever happened. It made everyone more productive. Gee, we had to type our own memos. Well, we all learned to type. We learned how to use the tools. We embraced the tools, and we become more productive. We're able to do even greater things. Today, we've got AI in front of us. Embrace the tools. I'm not too worried about AI right now, but I think that every change like this, it takes you out of your comfort zone, but it's a boring life if you just stay in your comfort zone for the rest of your life. So every time there's been a challenge, a change, even when the COVID pandemic hit, I thought to myself, I've never lived through a pandemic. This is going to be a very interesting period of time. And indeed it was.
I encourage you to read Steve Fantone's column in the January 26 issue of Photonic Spectra. Optica certainly will be doing a number of summit presentations as part of our technical program coming up later in 2026. Steve, really appreciate your time and your insights. We'll talk again soon, and all the best to you.
Great. Thank you very much.